All right, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks for taking some time to come in and learn a little bit more about Deep Brew. I'm John Francis, SVP of Analytics and Insights at Starbucks, and I promise I'll try to make this as painless as possible. I know we stand between you and the happy hour session after this, so we'll make sure we get through this. And you know, we also have a booth if you haven't been to it yet, so if you miss anything here and you want to go even deeper with the team, feel free to swing by the booth and check it out. So I'm going to give a little bit of context for what we're doing with personalization and why it's important to Starbucks. And you know, I'll quote the obligatory McKinsey slide here just to speak to why personalization is important. And you know, as you can see here from a couple stats, you know, 54% of businesses saying that they want to deploy some kind of machine learning capabilities over the next 3 years. Significant investment through a lot of enterprises, you know, across Fortune 100, Fortune 500, and in the space. But you know, the reality is, you know, I think there's some table stakes here, just in terms of, you know, personalization. Anyone who's used an e-commerce platform like an Amazon. This is not net new technology. These are not net new capabilities. So you're probably thinking to yourself, well, it feels like Starbucks is really kind of late to the game here. And why are we getting into this now? You know, it's been a long time, like I said, in the space. Well, the reality is, personalization, actually, before we ever loaded a piece of data, has really been in our DNA and as a company. And if you think about your own experience with Starbucks, and I'm assuming a lot of you have had experiences at Starbucks. I even see some cups in here today. It's really about the one-to-one interaction between the customer and the partner or the baristas in the store. And you know, I even think about my home store up in Queen Anne, and when I walk in, the barista knows my name, knows my kids' names, what they like to order, what I like to order. So you think about it, and you know, and again, it's sort of this offline experience with personalization, and how that really has helped us build an amazing brand. And so you think about the applications digitally, and it really, what we're trying to do, and what, you know, what makes Starbucks special is it's as much about the coffee as it is that elevated customer experience between, like I said, the employees at the store and our customers. And really, you know, we certainly are very passionate about the coffee, but we care just as much about that experience. And we also know that our customers, through a lot of research we've done internally, it's just as much about the convenience and consistency. And so what we've observed over the last 50 years almost is that it's actually becoming even more so about the convenience and more so about the consistency that you'd expect. And how that's manifested itself is really through the growth and adoption of our mobile application, of which we do a ton of transactions through every day. And it sort of, if you think about where I started and I talked about how we want to elevate the experience between the baristas in the store and our customers, this feels a little foreign to that, right? When you start talking about digital applications. Well, we actually think about this a little bit different in that it's really the app itself, and frankly any digital properties we have, is actually provides some really good surface area for how we can take what we've done and what's made Starbucks special in terms of that relationship between our customers and partners, and how do we bring that to life through the digital application. And in a lot of ways, you know, like I said, you know, recommendation systems, they've been really commoditized over the years. And so what we're trying to do is something a little bit elevated, which is we really think long and hard about that experience that you have in the store, and how do you apply it digitally so you feel just as good about the experience digitally as you do in an offline setting with a barista. So how do we try to make this special and personal for you as a customer? Well, if you think about some of the data that we have access to, and how we can build the math around the recommendations, it's everything from your transactions and your purchases to the ingredients within the products that you're buying, as well as the context in terms of what time of day and what store you're in geographically, and also as you think about weather. And you can take all these things and help really inform, like I said, an elevated experience that in terms of the recommendations that we're making. So, how we bring it to life, and I spend most of my time in email and PowerPoint, so I'm not going to go deep into this pseudo architecture diagram, but really Deep Brew at its core is a machine learning capability that we built internally at Starbucks that allows us, it sits on top of Azure, it allows us to quickly deploy machine learning algorithms across a number of different endpoints, and whether it's our mobile order and pay experience within the app, or it's a drive-through menu board, or I could go on into some other areas that we're exploring. It's really thinking through, what Deep Brew really allows us to do is give us effectively a playground that allows us to quickly iterate and test a lot of different algorithms very quickly and A/B test them through those customer experiences so that we can understand really kind of in a champion challenger way what's working best and allow us to deploy quickly with not a lot of impediments. So the team is going to go into a little bit more deeper into the architecture, but I just kind of wanted to set the stage here. And really as we think about, again, kind of doubling down on, why this is important to Starbucks. I think we've had some incumbent runs at recommendations, and just to give a specific example where, we had an early version that we would end up making recommendations based on things like the wisdom of the crowd, for instance. And you might, as a vegetarian, you might actually see repeatedly a bacon Gouda breakfast sandwich. And the algorithm wasn't smart enough to really understand that over time, that you actually, if you're not engaging with those recommendations, it's probably something that we need to be evolving and thinking about a little bit differently. So fast forward to Deep Brew, we've now built the infrastructure that allows us to take that spirit of comfort and connection between, again, our how we think about the relationship between our customers and baristas, and really take what they intuitively know when they interact with you, and how do we think about that in a digital world. So for instance, in this example here, we have a customer who is vegetarian, they like lattes, you can see the chocolate chip cookie dough, cake pop. And so what we do is over time, and we may not intuitively know this the same way a barista would know, but we learn from a customer's behavior and in terms of the products that they're buying and how they respond to the offers that we're extending, the recommendations. And so you can see 3 examples here where we have an ingredient level observer that looks to see and is constantly monitoring to say what types of ingredients and preferences does a customer have, and we can evolve our algorithm over time to account for that. Or if it's a category level observation and how we can observe that a customer likes baked goods and they may not necessarily want sous vide egg bites, for instance, or frankly even price awareness. So these are just 3 examples. We might see a customer who really just enjoys brewed coffee and may not necessarily want an expensive frappuccino or higher ticket item. So really these are just 3 illustrative examples of what's gone into the recommendation, the algorithms itself that allow us to make sure that we're constantly tuning and honing in on what's going to be most relevant for our customers. So just to quickly touch on this, and then I'll hand off to the team here. But so how we're thinking about the platform that we've built. I mean, the good news is it took a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to get to where we are in terms of the capability that we built in close partnership with our technology friends organizationally. And now that we have this infrastructure and this capability, it really, frankly, allows us to open up a lot of avenues where we can deploy pretty seamlessly. So and again, if you saw the keynote or you've come by the booth, you'll see that Deep Brew recommendations are currently running within our mobile order and pay experience. And you feel free to download the app and try it out if you don't already have it. But excuse me. But I think that's where you'll see the most personalized recommendations because we know a lot about you as a customer, just in terms of your behavior and your transactions. So it really allows us to optimize the most. And then going to the right, we're currently piloting some capabilities within the drive-through experience. So it would be less personalized. We're not doing facial recognition or any license plate scanning, anything of that nature. But really, there are attributes that we can assign at a store level around what's relevant for the demography of that particular store, and by day part and by leveraging weather as well. And then, of course, voice ordering is another application where we have some capability that's currently live that allows you to do transcription and then leverage the recommendation platform. So we're really just kind of scratching the surface. I didn't mention digital menu board yet, but that's an area that as we start to scale and deploy menu boards into more stores across our 13,000 plus stores, that will certainly be a canvas for us to think about how we can elevate recommendations within that environment. So that was just a lot of context. I'd like to hand it over to Vish, who is the Director of Engineering and has partnered closely with us on the infrastructure in the back end.
Thank you, John. Technically, I know we said we're between you guys and beers, but we're still brewing something here, so I think we're good. So BrewKit, right? So thanks to the concept that John outlined, in order to support world-class applications, we need world-class infrastructure. As we looked at our analytics platform, there was a need to essentially have that kind of reliability and scalability to support consumer-facing, global-scale applications like Deep Brew. So we need world-class infrastructure, and essentially the goals were to make modern analytics capabilities across Starbucks to enable the largest and smaller data science teams to do analytics at scale and without restriction. Enter BrewKit. So before I get into what BrewKit is, I want to get into some of the challenges we saw on the data engineering side before applications like Deep Brew that led to frameworks like BrewKit being deployed. From traditional tech stacks, all of a sudden we're dealing now with petabyte scale data, as well as real-time data products, batch products, plus a lot of unstructured data. It was a non-optimal engineering experience as well, because from a modernization standpoint, scaling a lot of our training, let's say they run on Spark clusters, took a lot of time. Our older infrastructure used to take more than 30 to 40 minutes to run our Spark environment, our distributed programming environment. And we also had to build our own frameworks to write merge, update, our own frameworks on the data. Not to mention small files problems on distributed file systems. As well as these compounded into SLA issues in production, because data pipelines were fragmented and there was no adherence to any SLAs. Also now these problems now started manifesting themselves up to a data science perspective. There was a need for co-located data sets. The ease of access, the gulf of execution between actually executing your workloads and your jobs was massive between the infrastructure that could actually do it. Long lead times and data fragmentation as expected, as well as platform friction. Increasing complexity. Now, as we're looking at scaling out applications, Deep Brew comes along, we now need to start looking at distributed computing, distributed GPU processing, et cetera. Also, this meant that the older infrastructure had users running models under their desk in a box. Now, when it came to engineering, we had to rewrite that to make it ensure that it's running at scale. Also, more importantly, it's cloud and security compliant. And the infrastructure lead time in this case, rewriting all these applications, was months. So essentially, the goal we set out to do was, how do we deploy these environments in a matter of not months, not days, but in a matter of minutes? How do we enable analytics teams across the board essentially deploy these environments and make sure they're dealing with their applications and building world-class stuff like Deep Brew and not just battling infrastructure? BrewKit. So BrewKit essentially was a framework that we built as part of the offerings around Brew to offer zero friction analytics. Essentially, we built a unified analytics platform to handle batch, real time, and all of the analytics workloads on a single technology stack. We want to reduce any impedance between model deployment and operationalization and infrastructure, and essentially deal with all the problems that I outlined before. From a platform value proposition, it meant that our business users could now focus on the applications and outcomes, not figuring out how to land provision certain services in Azure and then essentially ending up with a bunch of non-compliant infrastructure. So I'm going to take you real quick into how we are actually looking at BrewKit. I knew I would invoke Murphy's Law if I try to deploy the environment within the 10 minutes that I have here right now, but so I just deployed it right before this talk. So essentially, I'm going to use one Azure service. In this case, we picked Azure Databricks, to essentially show the way we're deploying some of the features that we've deployed on this environment. User access to workspaces are delegated, so teams like John's team, which actually use Brew, essentially use a bring your own Active Directory group model. So essentially what they do is they do not have to deal with long lead times of infrastructure teams deploying, adding users to groups, et cetera. They own their own user groups, and essentially we build processes which we call as AC Sync in-house, which essentially syncs user groups to our Active Directory environment so that our the users that need to have access to the environments are specifically the users that the business wants have access to the environments. All users are set up right with the right permissions and right after the environment is provisioned. We also use secure DBFS mounts to access enterprise data. What that means is we take away the complexity of users knowing keys and passwords, et cetera, now to configure their own environment. Think of a large enterprise like Starbucks. If you have every business group and hundreds of users trying to configure their own access patterns, it becomes a mess pretty quickly. Enterprise mounts are read-only. What we needed to do was essentially, I'm going to just try to write this to our enterprise mount here. Essentially what we needed to do was we needed to make sure that enterprise data, which is industrialized data sets that we are provisioning, are not writable. We did not want users essentially be able to write. It should be read-only access to enterprise data products. In this case, for example, I couldn't write to it because essentially I had an ACL error because all our enterprise published mounts are essentially locked down. However, we also wanted to make sure that users have the right level of access across different tools. We had data scientists deploying models via Scala. We had data scientists writing Python. We had a huge swath of users who essentially they were only using SQL to read their data. Essentially, we built our own MetaSync, which is backed on a Hive Metastore, to now start syncing all these published data across different user environments. This also gave us the flexibility to essentially isolate environments based on usage as well as business use case. Personal storage, now that I told you that you couldn't write to published layers and enterprise data assets, users and applications like Brew still needed the flexibility to write to personal storage as well as write to specific team workspaces, which is where we provided application storages. And then we also we deployed auto-scaling the most well-configured and optimized clusters in order to support different workloads. For example, if Brew needed specific GPU configurations in order to run training on a daily basis, we kind of provided that functionality out of the box. Another one of my favorite starter notebooks, what essentially, in order to democratize analytics across the organization with applications like Brew, we also started deploying starter notebooks so that we could truly now democratize this across data scientists and analytics users, regardless of skill level. We're also using, and we can talk more about it at the booth, but we're also now piloting a lot of our machine learning use cases using Azure ML. And Azure ML is helping us deploy a fully functional model lifecycle end-to-end. And we also use DevOps templates to deploy and monitor AI pipelines and models. We use Azure Data Factory for orchestration. And last but not the least, This kind of decentralized model helps us now start tracking the cost of deployments in a very fine-grained manner. Essentially, applications like Deep Brew now have extreme high insights on what they're spending on the services that are costing Deep Brew, the amount of money that it's costing them, as well as what they can do to optimize their application. Switching back over. So essentially, like I said, the data science template that BrewKit deploys for an application like Deep Brew uses a plethora of Azure PaaS services. For our REST endpoints, we use app services. We use a combination of Cosmos DB as well as a relational database layer. We also use Key Vault for secure key management, and you can read the rest of the different PaaS services. I want to highlight also that this is powered by excellence in engineering from a Starbucks automation perspective, where we do essentially one-click deployment of our template across Azure services. The deployment time of this template essentially is less than 15 minutes, which means that we can deploy this to any analytics team or a business group that needs to have a fully functioning analytics environment to create world-class applications like Deep Brew in a matter of minutes. We also provide audit frameworks as well as getting started, as well as the MetaSync and AC Sync, which are tooling that we've built on top of the stack. So essentially now we have hundreds of users onboarded on the stack, and once we provisioned BrewKit, we essentially were able to now deploy applications like Deep Brew. And I'm now going to have Ed DeRosa, our data scientist, come up on stage to talk about the nuts and bolts of Deep Brew. Ed.
Thanks, Vish. Hi, everybody. Ed DeRosa. I'm a data scientist at Starbucks. And just by show of hands, I'd like to see if any other data scientists or people practicing machine learning out there, if you could just raise your hand. Okay, maybe 10%. That's great. So if you are a data scientist or work in machine learning, it can be a challenge to deploy your models to production, to real-world customer-facing applications. And besides just making sure your model's right, you need to make sure you have all the systems in place for security, reliability, scalability, and things like privacy. So all those have to be addressed. So it was great having a partner in Starbucks Technology and Microsoft to help us do that in Azure and create a platform where we can deploy our models. So our first use case was recommender, as John mentioned. So we focusing on a couple of business objectives. We wanted to provide that recommender in the Starbucks through Starbucks Rewards mobile order and pay application. And so the two main objectives here were to maximize the probability of a customer purchasing an additional item to items already purchased in their cart, and increase or maximize the revenue or total ticket for that sale. So the idea from marketing parlance is upsell or cross-sell, so products. We built a recommender in our Deep Brew platform. We named it Purple Fish. And so the main thing was a couple of main key points is we wanted to learn about customer product preferences fast and continuously. So to do that, we needed algorithms that could adapt, like reinforcement learning, for example, and observe the individual customer purchases through their history, as well as interaction with our recommender. We needed to be proactive on a couple of edge cases, like if the user hasn't yet added a product to their cart, or if the user has no history, that's an issue. It's known as the cold start problem. So you don't have any history about the user, or possibly you don't have a history about a new product. And as you know, Starbucks has seasonal products, and they have limited time offer products. So we needed to address that as well. And a key feature is being extensible. So with recommendation systems, there's a lot of different choices, right? You have collaborative filtering, you have Bayesian bandits, things like FP growth. So we wanted to be able to have a flexible system where we could deploy many different types of algorithms around recommendations and test against them, test them against each other. And so I'll talk about a little bit about some of the intuition and science behind the recommender. How do we learn about the world? So there's this idea that for people that we try to observe the world. We have certain beliefs, and those beliefs are altered based on our observation or evidence about the world. And so on the left, you have Bayes' form of Bayes' theorem or Bayes' law. So this was a key element to the first recommender. And you have an equation here, which basically allows you to update probability distribution. And that's your posterior. So you take a prior about your belief, which may be an uninformed prior, so you don't really know much. And as you multiply that by the likelihood, which is our data generation process, is a binomial. So it's either a person might be vegetarian or they might not, kind of thing. Heads or tails in the coins. So you might remember that from statistics or probability class if you took it. And we divide it over a normalization value, and we get a posterior distribution. In the bottom right, you see a beta distribution, and initially there's a very uninformed prior, and as we get more information from the evidence about a customer purchase behavior, we can increase our confidence, which is shown by the narrowing of that distribution. And at that point, at the peak, we have a belief that we have high confidence in it. Okay, so a little bit more about how it works. We had to break up the problem into two phases. First, it's a pretty big state space, right? So you have a lot of different products, combinations, and pairings. So we really wanted to narrow down the options. And so we use the context to do that. Context is very important, extremely important to personalized recommendations. So people will make purchases based on different contexts, right? So you might have context of where you live, what day part it is, what you've already put in your basket, the weather. Those things will influence your choices and decisions about what products you're going to purchase, as well, of course, as your user history. So we narrow down the options first by understanding the state. I'll go into in a minute with a little bit more depth about the context observers, but these are used to determine some hidden or implicit preferences. So as John mentioned, can we determine if you're vegetarian? Or can we determine if you have a preference for a particular type of product, a category like blended, which is like a lot of frappuccinos. So, and then we can also optimize based on price sensitivity. So we do that. And then there's this necessity to use reinforcement learning, right? So we need to constantly adapt and continuously learn. And we determine what we have shown a user and how they have responded. So this is kind of like a conversion in a web page, right? So you need to get that feedback into the system. And then you need to generate a list of product recommendations based on a lot of those things I mentioned, like the state, the product pairing for both users, or if the user doesn't have any history, the wisdom of the crowd, if you don't have any history on the user. And then on top of that, you can take that recommendation, I'll show in a minute, and then you can add in the context observers. We'll look at how that works in a second. Lastly, if we have multiple algorithms that are competing against each other, we can use Thompson sampling. It's a Bayesian solution to the multi-arm bandit problem, which if you aren't familiar with, it's more of a issue where you have multiple choices to make and you're trying to optimize maximize your reward over time. So, and the diagram there kind of shows three different arms, and after given enough information, it optimally finds the best arm to pull, which is, I think, the one on the right in blue. So here's an example of our context observers, which really is what makes our algorithm special. So we have, over time, we're gaining more evidence. So the transactions are kind of shown in the upper left. As we have more transactions, we can learn about category preferences. So like there's a blended category, which consists of all our blended products like frappuccinos. We have, at the bottom, you have a vegetarian context observer. So as we learn more about a customer from their interaction with the system, we're updating our belief about those particular contexts. And so what you see here is you see somebody who's maybe leaning toward vegetarian. It's pretty high confidence in this simulation. Well, they don't really like the blended products, or at least they're not showing a lot of activity in that area. So, so our potential recs for the products are then up-ranked or down-ranked based on our context observers. So with that, I will turn it over to Brian to talk about the journey a little bit more, as well as the future of Deep Brew.
Thanks, Ed. Hey, everybody. First, I'd like to just start out and say thanks. It's a real pleasure working with this crew. So one of the things that's great about Deep Brew is the people that you get to meet along the way and the things you get to do when you reach this stage. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a tour of the journey, but it's going to be really quick. 3 phases. Phase 1 is building credibility with Azure and with your platform. So in order to do anything with machine learning, you have to unlearn how to talk about how great this thing is going to be and to focus strictly on security. So we had many meetings where we had to talk to people and say, basically your middle name is security from here on out. So thanks to everybody who was involved with the security and making sure that when you're in the cloud, your data is secure and you're actually doing everything that you can to make sure that you're being a responsible custodian of people's data. In phase 2, you have to make sure that your process is great so data scientists can just do the work that they do. And one of the great pleasures of my job is getting to see how the culture has changed at Starbucks and getting to see the data scientists empowered to handle real-world problems. But here we are in phase 3, we're at build, and we're talking about digital menu boards and drive-thrus and mobile apps, and this allows us to have some of the best conversations, and that are the what-if conversations, and why couldn't we? So whenever I think about machine learning, I think about the great brand that Starbucks has, the great data that we have, and the fact that we've got these great partners that are giving unbelievable service. And to a certain extent, I wonder why we can't replicate that in the mobile app. So every one of us here in this room has a little inner dialogue about coffee in their brains. That's one of the things that we have in common. And Starbucks is very proud that that inner dialogue is often, where can I get my Starbucks, or how quickly can I get my favorite drink? And so machine learning allows us to start to think about how we reduce friction and do a better job of, as soon as that inner dialogue ticks off, we can have you think, boy, I'm going to get this thing just the way that I want it, and I'm going to get it where I want it. So the shameless plug here is that in Seattle, Uber and Starbucks have linked up, and you guys are able to have Starbucks delivered to wherever you are, and it's a great step. But we want to go further, and so Deep Brew allows us to start to think about some cool things, like quick order. So the mobile app is fantastic. It's serving millions and millions of people every day, and the model that we have serves up recommendations, multiple millions of recommendations each day, and a fraction of a second, and everybody's really happy about it. But there's a question, like, why wouldn't we make it super easy? Why wouldn't we know exactly what you want and when you want it? Couldn't we actually predict when you're going to want your next latte or whatever your favorite drink is? So Purple Fish is a variant of that, is available for us to start to experiment with this. So the mobile app and everything that machine learning does can be tested with data thoroughly and quickly. Like, we're into a rapid testing cycle where amazing things can happen, and we can let the customers vote on what they want. So it's an exciting time for that customer experience in the mobile app. But we can do other things too. Like, I don't know how many of you have driven past a Starbucks and you see that the drive-through line is filled, and you just pass it off. Let's go to the next place, or I'll wait. Well, when you have a machine learning model and when you have the infrastructure in place and you can talk to any touch point, we can start to take a more aggressive stance on how to market during peak hours. So when we have a lot of traffic and the store is clogged up, we can now have all of the marketing, from the mobile app to the menu boards to the drive-through, recommend products that are quick to prepare. We can help you get your coffee a little bit faster. That throughput it's a win for everybody. Everybody should have what they want, of course, but we can sure pitch things that are most convenient to get that line moving quickly. And another thing is that Starbucks has some great values, and we want to make sure that we're being good custodians of the planet here. And so there is an aspiration to have zero waste in the food that we buy and what's left over at the end of the day. So everything that Vish and his team are working on is allowing us to have visibility into exact inventory position for all of our stores. And if you know your inventory positions and you know what the sales are in that moment, you can create a prediction of what's going to be left over at the end of the day and potentially waste. So combine that with the ability to talk to any touch point, and you can start to promote products to lead an inventory zero position. We want people to be happy. They should get whatever they want. But again, the machine can be like the best manager that's out there that says, hey, we've got extra of X product. Let's all push this a little bit. So in our heads, we see a very bright future for tackling important customer-facing and business-facing problems through machine learning. And Vish talks about being able to deploy the right infrastructure. Azure's certainly done a good job for us in that front. I won't sugarcoat it, but there have been many late nights, and there have been problems that we needed to fight through, but this is the Build Conference, and you all know that can be fun stuff. Like, there's not a moment of that I would want to turn back. So Azure, it also has a beautiful sort of angle to it that it's pretty deterministic. Once you head down a path and once you learn all the capabilities, and when you see all the things that are being unlocked at a conference like this, you know that you're going to be able to get your job done. It's just a matter of time. And sometimes you need to work through it, but that's fun. But I think the most important thing is that we are in like this new world where it's a battle for trust. Starbucks is a trusted brand, and it's a battle for convenience. And companies that are able to deploy machine learning models can scale, reach customers, and solve problems that allow us to compete in this world of convenience and trust. And with that, I will turn it over to some questions for anybody who has them. Thanks.
Questions?
How was it the progressive web app and data input for you? Was that consciously a decision you made, or you just haven't gotten to it?
So the native app was the first place that we started, and we're actually just sort of in the midst of the mobile, the web app. That's going to be the next application for us to think through. But when we started the journey, that wasn't actually, frankly, even a thing at that point. So, yes.
How did you approach justifying the ROI of actually building the Brew kit and building this custom framework? How did you kind of approach that?
Yeah, so from an ROI perspective, and why, maybe if I could extend your question a little bit. So instead of just maybe using a vendor or something off the shelf versus why we build the capability ourselves. So I think consciously, and you heard Brian talk about trust. I think one thing for us, well, there were a couple things. So one, we've really invested a lot of energy over the last 2 years or so to actually build out the data science practice internally at Starbucks. And over the last few years, we've taken different forays into partnering with different vendors. But I think we all recognize that the world is changing just in terms of data privacy and security. And again, I'll kind of reflect back on what I said about the most important thing to us is that relationship with a customer, and whether that's offline or digital. So for us, as we think about how do we ensure our customers that they can entrust us with their data and how we treat that data. And as you think about it, so there's two ways then to think about. One would be, the best way to ensure that trust is if you keep it yourself and you build those capabilities internally. I think the second thing I would say on that is, the worst thing that we could do, probably one of the most significant assets that we have as an organization, is our customer information and the knowledge we have about it. And it's not just what these guys have learned through the models that we built, but it's also the powering that with just what the marketing team and other teams organizationally intuitively know about our customer behavior. So as soon as you hand off, and I talked a little bit about sort of the commoditization of Rex. Like, the reality is you could go give your data to a third party, but the reality is it will never be as good as what you could build internally. So we view this as a competitive advantage for us. And it's also, again, really just to kind of double down on how seriously we take our customers' privacy and security around their data. It's a good question. Yeah, it's a good question, I think, and you guys feel free to jump in. I think we've done a good job of building the infrastructure. I think the way I would view that then is, the reality is the platform is there, the algorithms are there. You can run a different country's data through it. Now, I think there are probably some nuances, and as I just discussed, around what you understand about from a marketing perspective and what you intuitively know. And customers in Japan are different from customers in China, are different from customers in the US. So that's where the art and science comes in a little bit. But I think the good news is that we built the platform, and I think as Brian had talked about, the sort of the blood, sweat, and tears of that actually was a lot of the heavy lifting. It was just getting the infrastructure in the right place. Now we could think about how you might easily extend or expand to other markets. Of course, there are some conditions to that. There are certain markets, of course, where the data needs to stay in a particular geo, like in China. But I think we're pretty well positioned right now. I think it's really just about building those partnerships with some of the other countries to how you might take the platform and build recommendations that are relevant for their customers in those markets.
I think I'll also add that, with the BrewKit functionality, now we can, like I said, we can deploy in minutes, right? Essentially, we can now isolate services to regions and locations and deploy based on those locations, where we have the flexibility of either share nothing or share everything. So I think that helps us, that's been a huge step for us to be unfazed by deploying globally anywhere, because as long as the service is available, we can deploy it.
So you guys have talked a lot about learning from the user and learning about the user preferences. Do you use any of these data to look within to yourselves, basically? Basically, I'll give you an example, right? So there's a certain profile of people maybe that are big Frappuccino drinkers that tend to avoid allocation of Starbucks, right? Do you have anything to learn as to there might be something wrong in this location? Let's figure out what's wrong. Why are users skipping this specific location versus going to one that's farther away?
Yeah, and I'll take a pass. And tell me to shut up if you want, or say something else. But I think the way I think about it, so I think the other thing, so the thing we didn't talk about, right, was how we're really starting to think through building a customer 360-degree view, and how we look at multiple data sources. So the work that Vish's team on the technology side is doing is not just enabling the infrastructure, but also, frankly, helping us to seamlessly build data integrations. And whether it's a lot of the data we talked about here, or as you start to look at other data signals. So how do we start to look at unstructured data through Yelp or Google or Glassdoor, or you're parsing social data, and how you can start to, I think to your point, where you can start to collaborate across different data sets to see where there might be a pain point or a point of customer struggle or app reviews. So you can really start to think through and just think about your own journey as a customer with Starbucks or another brand, all the exhaust that you create from a data perspective. I think what we're trying to do is really collect all of that and harvest it into Azure within the data lake, so then that we can start to look across a lot of those data sources and really kind of create more of that holistic view and start to expose some of those problems. But it's a good point, and I think that's definitely a journey we're on, and I'd say we're probably about 50% of the way there in terms of the data that we want to integrate, and we're going to keep going down that path to start to paint that picture into customer behavior. Yeah.
How do you, I think somebody talked about this a little bit, but how do you get past the cold start problem?
So for cold start, if you don't have any user history, personal history, then we can use the context around your location on day part to provide wisdom of the crowd type recommendations. On the other hand, if we don't have any new product that comes out, like an LTO or a seasonal product, the algorithm is actually doing sampling across multiple choice context observers. So you might actually get a random pick that is something that's not optimal for you. So it does have some amount of exploration that's happening based on the higher the doubt, the more that it's going to try to explore. So that's the Bayesian type of explore, exploit for multi-arm bandit.
So you kind of make an educated guess.
They let the algorithm do it, right? So there's probability distributions, there's multiple probability distributions, say one context observer is on blended, right? And so if we sample that, we can potentially get something that you haven't tried before. So we would definitely want to have the sense of novelty, because that's important to a lot of our customers, to try new things. And so that's one way. The other way, we have marketing, right? So our marketing folks can also work within our system. We could up-rank brand new products, for example, Cloud Macchiato, if we needed to. So, yep.
How was your data model, and did you try to import any legacy data into that model?
Did you want to?
Yeah, I mean, sorry, I didn't know who asked the question. Oh, there you go. Okay.
Duration of your data model, like how far back does it go, and do you bring in like legacy point of sale data into that? Or?
Yeah, so I think, from a model perspective, yes, we needed to, in this case, as we were training, obviously we needed to have a considerable amount of data. So we had to go back, pull in a lot of our history data. But we also are setting retention policies on that data, so that we're not essentially, it's not a full-blown look-through for all. Personally, I believe we should start doing more and more with less data. Essentially make the models and algorithms, tune them as much as possible. And I know Ed and team are doing a great job of, in that direction. But to answer your question, yes, we did look at all history data to essentially establish a baseline context and then derive the algorithm from there. Thank you.
So to just follow up, so how do you handle the seasonality?
How do you handle the what?
The seasonality and trends,
Right.
summer,
Yes.
Yeah, so we employ exponential smoothing that allows us to capture the previous year and have those items kind of come with seasonality. Also, there's exponential decay that's happening. So there's a sense of recency in the algorithm.
kind of treat the discounting factor on the algorithm.
That's right. We have options to do both discounted and non-discounted. So we can let the algorithm kind of decide based on the user's history.
So you said that you use the A/B testing. So I was curious. So you already have your reinforcement algorithm, the Bayesian already there. I was curious that you try to use a bandit problem result to replace your A/B testing.
So not currently. We had an existing vendor who gave us recs. So we first wanted to make sure we were beating the vendor. And so once we established that baseline, then we're running at 100% of traffic now. So that's our opportunity now to improve our algorithms, test new things, and have it learn through Thompson sampling.
How did you come up with the name Purple Fish?
Good question. It wasn't me.
It was the result of late night coding, and maybe some beer was involved. Yeah. We're not marketers, so we're not good at naming things.
It was the same person who named Deep Brew, so he got 1 for 2, 50%.
Your models incorporate anonymous data?
Not currently. We have to use the Starbucks rewards data, so member data, but we'd like to figure out ways to move in the direction, source their data.
Actually, if you go back to my earlier question, do you have, so we had Starbucks card before we had the app. Do you have the card data associated with now the app data?
Yes.
Azure Connect.
Yes, so essentially our data has the transaction data identified based on whatever the channel was. Historically, yes, if multiple card, and that's why I mentioned the merge, inserts, etc. So in a lot of cases, as users are juggling through multiple channels, we need to make sure that there is a single point where we can pinpoint that user activity. So historical and new data across different channels.
So we monitor a lot of everything that's happening. So we have KPIs, business KPIs we look at on our dashboards and make sure that our conversion rates are good and our average ticket are good. And that's also how we're able to view our A/B testing. So that's basically a lot of health checks as well to make sure the system's up and giving recs.
So this may seem a little backwards, but I guess the idea here is to figure this out without asking. But do you ever ask?
Do we ever ask? I think what we'd like to do is give the customers the opportunity to put their preferences in there. And some of that is available, but we need to lean into that so we can actually determine whether you're really a vegetarian or not. And then we just override our algorithm, right? Because we only can base our beliefs based on the data. And if there's insufficient data, we don't know. And so
There's some ideation around, and there's plenty of examples here, whether it's Stitch Fix or Netflix, and how you might gamify a digital experience to start to think through around preferences and for you to play, frankly, more of an active role in the products and recommendations you're getting. So that's something we don't currently have, but it's something we're discussing internally and building out capabilities around that. Okay, did I mention we're hiring? And they're just to highlight a couple of things. So you can get a free bag of coffee beans every week. Try hold your applause. Summer Fridays, so half days on Fridays all through the summer. And frankly, we are literally just scratching the surface. I know I said it once already, but we are well positioned right now to do some incredible innovation, all the way up, frankly, to Kevin Johnson, who is a huge advocate for what our team is doing. And if, frankly, you want to be on that journey, come and talk to me. Find me on LinkedIn. I'm not going to give you my cell phone number here, but you can figure out how to get a hold of me. And then you can also go to our careers website. We have a few roles posted right now. But we're excited to be building the team. We're excited to share with you guys today. And like I said earlier, feel free to swing by the booth, and you can go even deeper and experience the drive-through as well as the MOP experience for yourself. And thank you for your time.